Hi guys, and welcome to this video, which will be about how to blend colored pencils. Especially talking about Prismacolor pencils, Polychromos or Liminance pencils, which are wax-based or oil-based, and therefore these coming techniques can be used and applied to. Before I start to explain in more detail, I want to show you which equipment I've used, so that you know what I'm talking about during the demonstration. At the left side you can see a white colored pencil and a Prismacolor blender. Then right to the Prismacolor blender you will see these wooden metallic thingies. These are stylus pens. I will tell about something about in the video. In the middle you can see a big bottle of Bob Ross paint thinner. This can be used to blend your colored pencils and will be explained in the demonstration. Next to it you will find the brush and pencils, textured fixative and final fixative, and above these bottles there is the powder blender, which is also from brush and pencils. I will demonstrate this in the video. On the left side you will have 3 Prismacolor pencils, which are the ones that I use for all the demonstrations. So these are the 3 colors that I'm using. And on the very bottom of your screen you will have these, I don't even know how to call it in my language. It's some kind of rubbery, gummy, anti-slippery thingy that you can put underneath your drawings or your working area so that nothing glides on the surface. When I actually draw or paint, I tape my sheet of paper on an MDF plate so that it's taped to a harder surface and that this plate does not slip on the ground, on my table. I put these rubbery thingies underneath so it does not move when I draw. This is the only reason, so you don't need to have them, but I find them quite handy. So coming to the question why I made this video in the first place. When I started with color pencils some years ago, I had not really a clue how to work with them. I knew colored pencils from school, but they were way different than the colored pencils that are available for artists. So especially here the Prismacolor, Polychromos or Luminance pencils. And when I switched over to them, full of inspiration, ideas and a good faith, I failed at the beginning. Because I made so many mistakes that I just did not know what to care about and did not know how to get the effect that I wanted to have. There were so many cool fancy speed drawings on the internet and YouTube, as you might have seen as well, which look quite easy and promising, and so I wanted to try myself and failed miserably. Therefore, after some experimenting and trying new things and testing things out, I wanted to give you a head start in telling you what I have done and what can be done on different techniques, and therefore I started this tutorial. As you can see, I have drawn 4 spheres. I already colored them all the same with the 3 colors that I'm going to use for this tutorial. And the first sphere, I will only use the pencils themselves to blend. For the second one, I will use the Colorless Blender. For the third one, I will use a paint thinner, which is the Bob Ross one, which you've seen in the beginning. And the last one I will use the new stuff, which is the color pencil powder blender. First things first, when you work with colored pencils, you should try shading from the light to the dark. So it is easier to darken things up in the end instead of getting too dark things light again. And try to build shades up with light layers only. So do not press too hard on your pencil to get much pigment on the paper, because this will damage the paper or damage the tooth of the paper and you will burnish it. Meaning you cannot add many more layers to change the color, and it will give a hard time to have a smooth blending and shading gradient afterwards. So only use light layers to add pigment to the paper and take your time. Color pencils are no fast medium. Doing the same in oils or acrylics will take way less time, but you have great control using the colored pencils, as this is a slower medium and you can or you should take the time to master. Do not expect a fine art piece at the first try or in the second or third try. It took me quite some hours to get a hang for it. once you know how blending works and you get a feeling for it, things are getting way easier than in the first drawings that I did with the pencils. As you can see, I gone back and forth with the 3 colors that I have within my sphere. So I blended over the different colors as well to get a smooth gradient. And the longer I draw over it, the less of the small white dots you can see from the paper. So adding more and more layers is the important thing to get rid of it. If you press too hard on your paper too early, so to blend the colors actually, you will have still a grainy look to it if there was not enough pigment on the paper. If there was not enough pigment and you've burnished already and blended already, you might not be able to get rid of these dots because you burnished. So you have no tooth left to the paper and cannot increase the shadows and the values anymore. So be sure to have enough pencil on the paper before you start blending and burnishing. These small crumbs that you can see every now and then on the paper, this is some kind of wax residue. So when you have enough layers on your paper that you will get a bit of a wax buildup on your paper, which will be scraped away once you get over it. If you have this is quite normal with these pencils. If you have this residue on your paper and you scratch it, make sure that you don't use your hand to swipe it away because this will make markers on your paper. Just use a soft brush or blow it away, or just don't touch the paper because this will make smearings all over your paper. Important thing to mention is also the paper that you use, and this is depending on your taste actually. I have used the Bristol 300 Vellum series paper for this tutorial. You can also use the smooth paper. If you use some paper with a more rough texture or more texture than the vellum paper, you will have to make more layers to get rid of all the white dots on the paper, and it needs more time for you to build up. I would suggest testing your preferred paper. I personally like the Bristol vellum or smooth papers for colored pencil. In the very end of the drawing I used a white colored pencil just to increase the highlights and to smooth out the light area a bit. You can erase some parts of the pencil, but you will never be able to go back on the white of the paper. So be careful that you don't have to erase too much. Erasing also in a way damages the paper, so if you have to go over it, you might see it in the end. Heading over to the next drawing, which will be blended with the paint thinner. As I've showed you, I use the Bob Ross odorless paint thinner just because it is odorless. I personally prefer an odorless one, just do not give me a headache. What the paint thinner does, it does dissolve the pigment into the paper, so you get rid of the white dots easily, and the applying process of the pencil basically is the same. Before you can use the paint thinner, you should make sure that you have enough pigment on the paper to blend actually. If you do not have enough pigment on the paper, you will still see the white dots because the paint thinner itself just dissolves the wax or the oil with the pigment and moves it on the paper and makes it sink into the paper. And if you have not enough pigment on the paper, there is literally not so much to spread around. So add your layers as you did on the first drawing as well. And once done, you can use your mineral spirit to blend. And therefore just use a tiny bit of paint thinner with a brush. Take a soft brush, that makes things easier. Dip your brush in the paint thinner and brush over your drawing. It takes a bit of practice, so before you start with your first fine art piece, try it out on a test piece of paper just to make sure you have a feeling for it, how it works. Don't use too much paint thinner, as this will make things worse, and in the end it will also take more time to dry. When you've applied your first layer of paint thinner, you will see that it saturates quite well. You have to let it dry before adding another layer of pencils, otherwise you will destroy the tooth of your paper. Once it's dried and you go over it, you can go over it over and over again, and blending again, using paint thinner and going over it again as much as you like. And for my drawing here, I just have used 2 layers overall. In case you do not have paint thinner at home, you might have heard that you can use baby oil or Vaseline to blend as well. It works, but I would not really recommend it, especially for pieces that you're going to sell. Baby oil does basically the same thing as the paint thinner does. It looks quite similar, but there's a difference that the baby oil itself will never really dry. And yeah, you don't really know what happens to the baby oil in a couple of years. So if you're going to sell your artwork and you've used a non-art product, you have no idea how it will look, if it changes the color, if it yellows, or I don't know what can happen. So paint thinner is really not expensive, and if you plan to sell your works, I would suggest using the tools that are meant for it and that I prove to be safe. As the first two drawings are done, I want to tell you something about a Stylus pen. Actually, these ones are used for clay, so if you search them in Amazon, look for a Stylus pen and add clay behind it, so you will find them easier. They're quite cheap and quite handy. So what you can do, they come in different sizes and you can make some kind of imprint in the paper. And when you go over it with your pencils, you will not go within these imprints. So if you go with a light touch and don't press too hard, the pencil will just slide over it and leaves it more or less blank. So the bigger the imprint, the harder it is to not slide into it, of course. But these ones can be used to draw white hair, for example. If you use a tiny stylus pen and you imprint some hairs that are meant to be white and go over it with a gray and black whatsoever pencil, these will remain white. But keep in mind that you will see that there is an imprint. So depending on how big the imprint is, you will see it in the end that there is a damage to the paper, which it actually is. But if this is not much of a deal for your drawing, then it's a great way to create certain effects. Heading over to drawing number 3, which is blending with a colorless blender. I think all the brands that have wax-based or oil-based pencils do offer colorless blenders, which is just a pencil without any pigment. So it is like a blue pencil without a blue pigment, just the wax or the oil-based where the pigment is added for the colors. You can use these ones for blending as well. The technique is quite the same as for the pencil-only drawing. You add layers over layers to the paper just to have the pigment on the paper. And then you can use the colorless blender to blend all the colors together. By using this technique, you will need to make sure to have all the pigment on the paper that you will need, because the colorless blender will in a way burnish the paper. So you need quite some pressure to blend the colors together. And therefore you will flatten the paper, which is burnishing the paper, and you will not be able to add more layers over it. Perhaps one, perhaps two if you are lucky, but you will not be able to add any more layers to increase the depth in a way that you could have done before burnishing. What it does, it dissolves the pigment that's on the paper in the white dots from the paper and gives you a smooth look. It also needs some training to get the effect that you want to have, and from my opinion it does a bit destroy the saturation that you will get without using it. So in version number 1, when you only use pencils, you can achieve a higher contrast than by using the colorless blender. For the fourth and the final drawing of these spheres, I am using the colorless blender and the fixatives. Actually, for this technique, I should have used another paper. To make this work as it is intended to work, you should use some non-absorbent papers, which is, for example, pastel matte paper. The powder blender is a powder which is very, very fine. So when you apply it to the surface of a regular paper, it is so fine that it will instantly fall into the gaps of the paper, and it does not the effect that it actually is meant to do. When you use a pastel matte paper, for example, so a non-absorbent one, this powder will stay on top of, let's call it, hills on the paper, and therefore it can do the job that it's meant to do. So to make this work in a way here as I wanted it to work, I applied the first layer of my colored pencil, added then the powder blender and blended over it. The powder blender just dissolves the pigment so that you can use it like you can use pastels, and the pigment can be moved along on the paper. There is a textured fixative. When you apply it to the drawing, it will fix the layers that are already on the paper, and it will also add some texture back to the paper. So if you have burnished in any phase, you can use this fixative, spray over it, and you get some texture back to add more layers over it. This works for all techniques you've seen before as well, so this is a quite handy stuff to have if you go for colored pencils. When your layer is fixed, just add another bit of the powder, which only needs a very little amount. It goes quite a long way, and add more pigment to the paper, and so on and so on. You can do this as often as you want. There is not really a limit, and as you can see in the final results, I was able to achieve the highest contrast by using this method. I did one mistake. As you can see, there is a build-up on the left side of the drawing. This was where the fixative was not yet dried, so make sure that the fixative layer is dried completely before you add the next layer. Basically, this is all the technique that I have used myself so far. Test them out and look what you like the most for yourself. I've shown you a picture in the end of all the 4 drawings on one paper, so you can see the differences between them. I personally had the feeling that number 1, number 2 and 4 worked the best for me. I do not like to use the Colorless Blender, as there is the saturation just too limited. By using the paint thinner and the texture fixative, you can increase your contrast quite a bit. So the highest contrast shows drawing number 4, which was using the fixatives, which I'm sure could be applied on the pencil only and the paint thinner drawings as well, just one layer and add another layer of pencils, just to increase the contrast there as well. As usual, I hope this video was of any help for you. If you have any questions, just let me know in the comments. If you liked my video, just give me a thumbs up, subscribe, or both, and I would be happy to see you in my next video. Have a great day. Bye bye.